Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to your favorite show. At least we hope so. And it's certainly our favorite time. We love coming and sitting down and having these discussions with you guys everywhere around the world. We hear your comments, we see your comments, and please keep liking, subscribing, and sharing. And it's a tribe that we're building, Friday Drinks Tribe. And today it's a special occasion because we've been forced by the producer to wear his golf t-shirts.
Although none of us play golf.
Look, how does it work?
Look, we have to look the party and to just showcase to our viewers that we are growing and we are trying to.
So we're going into merchandise. Are we?
No. But obviously, we want the brand to be out there because they've been supporting it for more than 2 years now, and to some of our viewers who would want to identify with us. They can look good on a Friday in these golf t-shirts, Friday drinks.
Well, there you go. If you're slightly overweight, we have the right golf shirt for you. As you can see, this is what happens when you're middle-aged.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, eh? It's just hard and harder.
What's your excuse? Because you actually run the comrades.
Yeah, but then, so there's a lull in training after comrades. And you kind of fall off the wagon. But,
until the next comrades.
Until the next comrades. So check me out, April, May, June next year. I should be looking much trimmer than I am right now.
Okay, fantastic. But you have to agree, these are fantastic golf shirts.
Yes, absolutely. The producer definitely scored a winner on this one. I'm quite impressed because normally when you leave him to do things that require taste,
he's found one thing.
We get things horribly wrong. But
because Rufaro believes that taste simply means pricey, something that you have to overpay for. So we are trying to demonstrate that you could actually still get a good quality merchandise for reasonable prices. Yes. Yeah.
It's not $1.
No, it's certainly not $1.
Why are you looking for a suit that?
Because somebody out there. You know what? It's actually I'm very curious because somebody out there. I put out a tweet and I asked, how much a suit costs, like the least expensive suit that's out in the market, and people were coming up with $10, $20, $25, because I just wanted to gauge where we are, and then somebody put out that actually you can get $1, for trousers and
a jacket.
So I was curious, right? And it wasn't just one person; it was quite a number. So I'm curious to find out what this dollar suit actually looks like, but that's something that we're going to discuss later on.
I'm curious too.
Yeah, where do you buy your clothes?
I get most of my clothes from the producer. He's a penny pincher.
I think people have to normalize this fact that you don't have to overpay for you to look good. And also that we now have got so many options. I'm sure I've heard of runners. So these runners, you might actually think that they're bringing Mabero only. But they can actually bring some nice brands for you. It's part of the informalization of the economy.
Okay, it's something that we will discuss. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, there's quite a bit that we have to discuss today, and these are some of the topics that we're going to get into. I mean, I remember 20 odd years ago when we started working, it was such a privilege to walk into Truett's, Edgar's, Mikkel's, Barbers, Barron's, Modique and Topman, get their credit card and actually buy a suit and buy clothes. It was, such a marvel. And now it's just very difficult. Unaenda ubero.
Yeah.
Have you actually bought anything from? Because I have actually.
Yeah.
Have you picked up anything from Bero?
Yes, I've done that a couple of times because obviously my madam is an entrepreneur on that side of the business, and I've actually found you would know it having stayed in the diaspora that so when people think of Bero, they are looking at they maybe visualizing.
It's vintage.
Yeah, they're looking of something that is torn or old or whatever. But depending on where you source them, you could actually find some things with a tag. And like whenever you look at people walking the streets of Harare, the one way for you to see if something is they got it from the barrel or from the shop is the boutiques have got these problems. So they just bring one type of item. So you actually find like 5-6 women walking on the street wearing pretty much the same. I'm sure I've seen some of those on social media.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but if you see people wearing unique kind of clothes, obviously at the higher end they buy them straight from the shops, but at the mid or lower end it's mostly from the
But how can you tell them apart? Because sometimes you will have some legitimately high-end brands that people throw away, right?
Well, that's fair.
Yes,
exactly.
yes,
That's what I'm saying.
yes.
So you can't
So
actually
it's-
tell.
no, it's actually the quality.
You can't actually.
So if you find something in
No, you're saying if it's unique.
yes, it's
Yeah.
unique and high
it's
quality.
somebody that you do not associate with quality, then it's probably better.
Yes. And
That's his
it's
argument.
actually a better option than maybe going to the boutiques where they are selling you some fake. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of Louis Vuitton and these
Gucci.
Gucci's, whatever. You don't want that. I mean, okay, maybe you do, but
Anyway, gentlemen, that's something that we're going to discuss later on. What are you drinking?
Oh, we always start with the boring side of the of the bar.
Okay,
where
we-
you teetotalers are desecrating. You know,
It's
this
going to be a long
establishment.
night, and
So
we've decided
You're caffeinating.
We're caffeinating.
Okay.
yeah, and it's also quite warm. You see, this
It's a beautiful sunny day,
yeah.
actually.
Yeah, so
So I actually chose to go with something refreshing, you know, that you can drink with lots of ice, as you can see. And this is a gin. I don't know how much you know about gin. You know, it's
Not
one
much.
of the simpler, cheaper forms.
I think
of
that women tend to have a gin and tonic.
Well, that's not actually true. It used to be associated with much older people in their 60s and 70s, gin and tonic. You know, this quintessential geriatric
And not
drink.
women,
But
ladies.
it's come back in vogue these days. You know, you have all these different types of gin, and people like to put all sorts of things in the glass to drink with them. You know, berries, cucumber, strawberries, and there's all sorts of. It's actually quite a big fad, and I'm surprised that it's lasted for quite some time. So the Indians are world famous for spices and herbs, and I don't know, you know, like I said, I don't know how much you know about gin, but basically what they
Like I said,
it's-
I've explained.
it's-
Lots of women drink gin and tonic.
they just
That's all I
basically
know.
it's a very they take any grain alcohol, and then they infuse it with these herbs and spices, and then, you know, that's how you end up with this. And this, you know, so it's a Bombay Sapphire. It's an Indian gin. It's one of the better ones, and I mean, even you would be able to tell from the smell that it's got this, you know, all gins have one ingredient in common, which is juniper berries, and it's this very strong pine-like smell. And then, you know, they put all sorts of other botanicals in there for the flavor. And I'm having it with a tonic, a pink tonic.
And why? Why do you have gin and tonic?
I think it's
What's
just
so special about
it's
it?
just the tradition. You know, other
What
people,
else could you have it with?
you could have it with soda, you could have it with lemonade or ginger ale. But tonic is the, you know, it gives it a very unique flavor.
Okay.
And because I'm Banting, I'm having the sugar-free version. Like you guys are having the sugar-free version.
So okay, that explains why you didn't eat your bread.
Yes.
Like, you know, Bottom Drawer makes some really good home baked bread, and you didn't eat it.
No, well, I'm trying to keep in shape. Banting helps.
Okay, that explains. And you're joining me.
yeah, it's quite warm, so
And you're a farmer. Are you not worried?
no, I'm not worried. I think I think the rains that we received in October were quite encouraging in a way. We were obviously worried about the El Nino talk and all, but I think the heavy rains that we received, especially around Harare, sort of so it reassured us that maybe it won't be as bad as we feared. But obviously, as a farmer, you need to go with early maturity kind of crops. So that
So have you planted?
No, I haven't started. So usually they say maybe the right time will be mid-November thereabout.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a weekend farmer who he's actually an analyst that sometimes identifies as a farmer. I
It's a
wouldn't.
hobby.
I
It's
think
a very expensive hobby.
I think we're being unfair to farmers if we describe Ranga as a farmer.
Well, our other George, he's an avid farmer. He's been at it for a very long time.
Yes, he's also a weekend farmer. He's a part-time farmer at best. We really can't call him a farmer.
Yeah. Well, there we go. So we've got a lot to discuss and we've got a lot to go through. But the first thing that we want to talk about is the new SI 118A that was introduced a week ago, and it extends the multi-currency regime right through to 2030, December 2030. So it was bound to end in 2025. So they've extended it with another 5 years. Will that make a dent? Is that significant? That in itself? I mean, lots of people that I spoke to, there was some sort of relief, but also, with the relief is some sort of trepidation. I think a lot of people are worried that it's there, but it lacks the substance. So it's something that they've said, but a week before, the president had come out very sternly to business, and he had said, and I quote here, "It's time we bite the bullet and introduce monocurrency." And then a week later, we have the SI extending the multi-currency regime. So, Shumba, what do you make of it?
Yeah, so I never took talk of the monocurrency seriously. I always thought that was a pipe dream. Simply because the biggest bank in our country today is the National Mattress Bank. In terms of the market share, the US dollar is probably north of 80. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if it was north of 90%. So the idea that we could somehow turn back the wheels of time and go back to a monocurrency, it was never going to work. And I think that what probably precipitated this SI is the banks and the business community making the case that, look, because 2025 is only 2 years away, it's just that much harder to issue new loans and do new business contracts and arrangements if there's uncertainty over what currency we're going to be settling after 2025. We needed this extension to 2030, and to their credit, I think the government listened and they issued this SI. What's unfortunate about all of this is that this change has actually not been passed through Parliament. It's not a normal law. It's a statutory instrument, and tomorrow there could be another one reversing it. We've had in fact, so far this year, we've had more than 200 statutory instruments, and we've still got, almost 2 months to go. And that's not the best way to actually legislate and lay down laws and regulations. I think, we have a whole new parliament.
So do you think that the banks have the confidence now? So if they wanted the extension, they got the extension through an SI, do they have the confidence to lend?
Look, I think they're much more likely to consider lending than before this SI. But on the ground, the sense that I get is that there's not much happening in terms of the bank lending anyway.
So that removed the needle. Ranga, what are your thoughts on this? The new SI? And what are you getting from your clients and your industry? Are people relieved? Are they happy? Do they see it as progressive? Do they see the form?
I think there's confusion. So on one end, so the extension is some sort of a relief, but you also get a sense that maybe the policy environment is such that they prefer monocurrency. And okay, it was one thing maybe that kind of talk happening during election, but if it's happening,
like me preferring a six-pack.
Yes. if you're hearing that kind of talk post-election, it just tells you that that's actually the underlying, the sort of thinking that they have. So and
they're
then
being forced
this
into
SI is
it.
actually being forced. I actually don't think it was the banks that moved the needle. There's probably a big creditor or some, it could be, or the Chinese or some other big investors who were really worried, maybe on a specific transactions. I think we've seen it in Zimbabwe, where a whole law, where there's an SI can actually be promulgated just to accommodate certain individuals. But I think the underlying tone from the politicians is they are preferring monocurrency. And for the banks, I think the banks, these are depositors' funds. So to the extent that they've been given an extended 5 years, they'll be keen to lend more. I think the person that you need to ask is the depositor, that will you be comfortable with your funds being
Well, the largest depositors it turns out are your foreigners, actually, your multinationals that are mostly in mining. They're the ones who have deposited in the banking sector.
Okay.
And I think to your point, I think they're also worried about their investments. I think people always forget that from a historical perspective, that it's actually South African businesses that have heavily invested in Zimbabwe. All right. And it's what they think that actually moves the needle. And maybe to your point, I mean, we are just speculating. I think that they're the ones that move the needle because the president was quite clear. A week before, in Victoria Falls, he was quite clear. It's time to bite the bullet. You know, and then a week later, we see the SI. But what I found also very interesting is, you know, the presentation that Mtuli made at the ZANU-PF conference, he didn't talk about currency. In fact, that's something that people just don't want to talk about. Like, you know, you would think that the Herald would be celebrating, that ZBC will be pushing out that, you know what, this is a multi-currency regime and it's time for us to celebrate, but there are no celebrations at all. I don't think, I tend to go with Ranga, that within the corridors of power, I don't think that this is something that they wanted. This is something that's forced on them. And that's really where the worry is. So the substance is this is a good thing, but the worry is these guys actually don't believe in this.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that I'll certainly give this government credit for is over the last 5 years is that they have a pragmatic sense or they've got a pragmatic way of doing things. They've got their ideology, and a lot of it is about command economics, almost socialist in outlook, and they've, to the extent that they've been able to, they've tried to push that agenda as much as possible. But when that agenda has had to interface with reality, pragmatism has prevailed, and I think this is what's happening here. You know, so I agree with you that you know, if we lived in a land of fairy tales, we would have a monocurrency. But we don't. We live in the real world, and monocurrency is just not going to work. And they've accepted this reality. It's not what they want.
So for how long do you think this reality is going to persist or hold in the next 5 years?
So I suspect that the trend that we've observed over the last few years, where the Zim dollar has been losing market share to the US dollar in the economy, that trend is going to continue. In fact, I suspect that by the time we get to the end of this term, the Zim dollar will probably be less than 1%.
Well, Zim dollar is going to be forced on people because now there's another thing that they've introduced within days of promulgating the SI, that they extend multi-currency. They've introduced right across exporters that the 25% now applies to all exporters. So a surrender requirement for all exporters, including the artisanal miners. We've got the Victoria Stock Exchange. You know, they were given an allowance that they could export 100%, retain their money 100%.
On incremental revenue.
On incremental revenue.
Yeah.
But now with this, what are your thoughts? What are, you know, the guys on the stock market, what are they thinking? And how, and then tie that with the artisanal miners as well.
So it speaks to the policy inconsistency. And I'll be surprised if there was anyone in their right mind who actually thought that we were going to see the Victoria Falls Exchange maintaining that privilege that had been bestowed on them. And it's actually tied to the...
So are you saying that when it was introduced, that was crazy in itself?
No, it was crazy. And also knowing the kind of policy makers that we have, it's... I don't think there was anyone serious who actually believed that, save for some corporates, because I saw some corporates actually moved away from the ZSC to try and benefit from that incremental, from that, dispensation. But I think it was bound to be changed. That's why you find that the foreigners are not, they didn't buy into this whole Victoria Falls Exchange thing, because they're saying it's Zim. So the policy environment will affect Zimbabwe as it were. In fact, during that time that that new exchange was being launched, we saw actually the number of foreigners that were actually moving out of Zimbabwe was increasing. So we didn't see people actually migrating from the ZSC to the Victoria Falls. They were actually shipping out. Most foreigners actually preferred to stick around on the ZSC, because it has been easy for them to sell in Zim dollars, find some ways of changing it into US dollars. So
it was just an expensive.
It was.
Look, I had a bit more optimistic take. It was a red herring, or when the exchange was initially established, but when they actually promulgated the special dispensation for incremental production, I thought that was a fantastic incentive. And it actually convinced some big corporates who explicitly listed on the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange to take advantage of those incremental.
Well, that's what Ranga is saying.
Yeah,
that they were delusional.
I actually wonder why businesses, individuals are consistently delusional when it comes to the policy environment in Zimbabwe. So there's one thing that is consistent, that the
chopping and changing.
Exactly. it will always happen. And whenever you see something that looks good, it's because someone's hand is being forced. Someone trying to maybe you don't get that they're excited about the dispensation that they'll be actually announcing to the public. And for me, even the Victoria Falls, when it was launched, I never saw it in that way, that these companies were going to maintain that special dispensation regarding their incremental revenue.
Okay, all right. So I understand that from that perspective. How about the special economic zone? So there were people that were given 10 years that came into this market, and they've been given 10 years or more, where they could actually retain their money 100%. And it was purely on that basis that they invested in Zimbabwe. Now you've got this new law that says, 25% you're going to have to surrender. Because it changes everything. It changes the investment case.
I believe, though, that those ones actually can make a case that can be viewed on a case-to-case basis to the authorities, because they had a specific time frame. And they also actually invested some money on that understanding. But then it also creates a problem, because you want a policy. You want a situation that is flexible, that allows for someone to make some discretion. Okay. So once you have a policy in place, it has to apply to everyone that's playing in that kind of environment.
The artisanal miners, what's your view?
I think it's a sad day that we've introduced this 25% for the artisanal miner, because what I suspect is going to happen is that they're simply not going to deliver their gold to Fidelity and the other formal takers of gold. It's all basically going to be smuggled out of the country, where they will retain 100% of it. So I just wonder sometimes when these policy decisions are made, to what extent the policymaker applies their mind to the likely outcome. Because it's all great if they had high conviction that this 25% retention will actually lead to them accessing additional currency through the 25% retention. But that's clearly not what's going to happen. All that is going to happen is that the deliveries through the formal sector are going to shrink.
Dry up.
Yeah.
Oh, but we're not that clever, guys. Gentlemen, we're not the cleverest. Surely the policymaker, surely the politicians, they know this. You can't control the artisanal miners. Just as you can't control the informal sector, the National Metros Bank, you can't force its hand. You can't force the hand of these miners.
They know that, but they also have an insatiable appetite for this foreign currency. So even if it disturbs the entire flow of economic activity, they don't. I don't think they make.
Well,
the
shouldn't they give an incentive rather than a disincentive? Because this is a disincentive. What they should offer, if they wanted currency, was to offer incentives. Then even the informal sector would start using the formal channels. Isn't that obvious?
I think that's ordinarily that's the kind of thinking that you'd expect. But I think where we are right now, probably the thinking is anything that could help them get more their hands on more currency. And I just wanted to make a comment on the artisanal miners. Like if you analyze the gold output numbers over the years, you'd find that the output from the corporates has generally been stable, at least the official numbers that they are delivering at around 10 to 11 tons. Every time you see the numbers are increasing substantially or decreasing, it was mostly because of activity on the artisanal side. And I don't think it's because the artisanal miners would stop or reduce the activities on some years.
They're just responding to
Yeah,
policy.
they're just responding to pricing and delivering less. And because you don't have a way of policing it, it really doesn't make sense for the policymakers to think maybe they can get something out of them. And what would they give them? Zim dollars or Zig or what?
Yeah, and also if you actually think about it from longer term perspective, what you want to see is the corporate mining sector grow significantly. So all the space that is currently being mined by the artisanal miner, ideally in a normal functioning economy, the big corporates should actually be approaching these artisanal guys and taking over from them those ore bodies and mining them at scale with machinery in a way that's very efficient, right? The reason why you're not seeing that expansion by the formal corporates is because you've had all this chopping and changing regarding policy. So the guys in the corporate gold mining space are in a defensive posture, right? Their primary concern is how do they preserve value? How do they survive, right? Whereas everywhere else in the world, people who are running corporate mines are thinking, let's do more exploration. They actually their mindset is growth focused. How do they increase capacity? How do they grow the business? And so this is the tragedy with the last 10 years of policy, that because we've been so inconsistent, you haven't seen those investments. We could easily have seen, billions of dollars coming through to expand the formal corporate mines, but we haven't seen it.
And the other exporters, what are your thoughts there? What's going to happen there?
So the other exporters also pretty much in the same situation, where you have to do the surrender and then you're receiving the Zim dollar, which you may not have
Use for it.
use for. And I think it was different maybe 12 months ago, where the certain expenses that you could still pay in Zim dollars, and I think even the taxes themselves, you'd find that maybe there are certain lines that you still have to pay in foreign currency obviously they will try and push for certain lines to be paid in Zim dollars, but it doesn't make sense. And you know what it does? It actually encourages and promotes sort of under invoicing and under reporting from the players.
True.
And to try and get investors on board is going to be very, very difficult. There were some areas where there was a lot of traction. If you look at on the horticultural side, where that were being projects that were being funded by mostly local institutions, because they were attracted by the US dollars that were being generated. Yeah. So the moment you're saying that has been diluted by 25%, it makes it less attractive, and maybe it might actually affect funding.
So I've got a question for you, because there's, again, that's where it's a paradox or a problem with the policy, is that it's actually punishing the guy who's bringing in US dollars, because someone who's actually a local producer and selling in the local markets where they're getting US dollars, they're not being punished. So they retain 100% their money, but somebody who's actually going out and exporting, they get punished with Zim dollars. Isn't that obvious? I mean, honestly, how do you reconcile the two?
It's said because even the local US dollars that you're talking about, they have to come in through someone exporting in one form or another.
Yeah.
So they only become local after someone
is exported.
Yeah. So you'd think that maybe you'd encourage more exports, yeah, so that at least you have got more liquidity of these currencies locally. But as it is, it's the other way around, and it hits exporters of commodities that can't possibly be used around. For example, it's flowers, blueberry, or something like that. That there's very little use, or even in other,
even platinum.
You see, yeah.
You see,
so
and is that not crazy? So you're a platinum miner, you export the product, they take 75%. But if you are a producer of your local beverages, especially alcohol, and you sell to a local producer, and you sell to the local market, you get your money 100%.
Yeah, it's really sad because what we actually should be doing is increasing
the exports to bring in the dollars.
Just recently, the governor of the Reserve Bank indicated that because of the lower commodity prices, we're actually going to see a contraction in export receipts, and in fact, the diaspora is going to be an anchor of our economy. But we're such a wealthy country in terms of our natural resource endowment. If we actually opened up the export sector for investment, we could potentially be exporting 5-10 times more than we're exporting at the moment. But because we have these rules and regulations and exchange control, you're not going to see the investment, and you're not going to see the increase in.
So
in
the
production.
other thing is, okay, so we are now exporting less, and export receipts are actually dwindling. But on the other side, we're actually importing more. So fuel prices going up because of the geopolitical tensions. Interest rates have gone up, and what we're paying, more particularly the SDRs from the IMF, they've moved the interest rate from 1%. So when it was 1%, you were also earning 1%, and sort of, closed each other, and there was no payment, more or less. But now they've increased the interest rate to about 4.2%. And because of the 4.2%, we have to pay on our SDRs that we drew down on, we pay something like 55 million US dollars that we have to pay. This was unbudgeted, and 55 million in our economy is a heavy strain already, right? And exporters' money was already ring-fenced with our international creditors, and interest rate is already increased. I mean, where do you see it going? I mean, if we've talked about multi-currency, we've talked about all these other policies, and we've talked about, the limitations. So where are we going, and what can business do?
So I'm actually cautiously optimistic because I think that if you look at the immediate post-COVID years, we had this manna from heaven, the injection from the SDRs, and then geopolitically, you had the Russian invasion of Ukraine early last year, which basically caused a spike in commodity prices, which we benefited from. So a lot of the things that we did in the economic policy arena that were less than optimal didn't hurt us as much because we were benefiting from the SDRs and we were benefiting from significantly higher commodity prices.
I'm still waiting for the optimism.
So going forward, right? We're going into a drought. The party of high commodity prices has ended. We are now at a place where they are significantly lower than they were. We are not getting another freebie like the big SDR check we got. So the
options are limited.
The options are very limited. And the repercussions of policy mistakes are going to hit harder, faster. So there's a much so in a sense. So this
Faro, are you a masochist?
So no, I'm not a masochist. What I'm saying is, because we have these constraints, and because the repercussions are going to bite faster and harder, we are actually more likely, because this government is pragmatic at some level. We're going to see more and more of these decisions, like abandoning monocurrency and embracing multi-currency until 2030. The pragmatic path is the only path that is going to work.
Okay. Do you believe that? That because what's actually happening is they're pushed into a corner, and because they're pushed into a corner, they have to make pragmatic decisions.
But it's not being pragmatic when you're actually reversing some of the wins that you had. For example, the issue of the artisanal miners. So what it means is you're going to affect the gold delivery from the artisanal miners, and you'd expect that
So Rufara's argument is that's okay because
they'll force them.
Once it gets to zero,
then they'll start.
Then they'll do a reversal.
Then they'll start
when they when they feel the pain, then they will start making. Then they will make a reversal. But
Yes.
it's like, why do we have to go through that process?
And
unless you're a masochist, why bring such pain?
And we can't be mean reverting on a very low number. Like, okay, it looks like our target is to be close to zero as much as possible. Look, I think we had an opportunity to just. I thought maybe post-election and all, everything was going to be business friendly, as it were, trying to grow internally because we don't have access to international capital markets. So you're encouraging your exporting companies or your exporting businesses to grow production. You support them, and also maybe. So that you're talking of the drought, so you still have to create some safety net and etc. So it was better to have a thriving industry, exporting industry that can bring in the currency.
So, all right, gentlemen, I think we've spent enough time on this. We need to move on.
I just wanted to make one comment.
Okay.
That so we all agreeing that the proportion of transactions that are happening in Zim dollars has actually gone down probably 15%, 10%. How did they come up with the number of 25%? So ordinarily, I would understand if this, because it doesn't make sense to want to give someone Zim dollars like 25 cents out of their dollar in a market where it's probably only 10 cents out of a dollar. That's useful. So it doesn't really show
pragmatism.
Yes, from that end.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Now let's go on, and so this was a touchy subject because I caught a few, stray bullets.
Were they stray or were they aimed squarely at you?
Well, I think some were stray because I didn't understand where they were coming from. I thought that people would argue. But it turns out that anecdotes are very useful and sound bites.
You're talking about Econet.
Let me explain. So what we want to discuss is it has to do with ICT and it has to do with our data tariffs. So recently we saw a 100% increase Portres, that's the regulator, has actually increased tariffs by 100% over the last year, and this is in Zim dollars. And it turns out there were a lot of sound bites, especially on social media, where people were saying that, oh, Zimbabwean data prices are very expensive. And usually the case that they use is the very expensive uncapped package, which I think goes for about 170 to, I think, 225 US dollars. So when you then compare it regionally, it looks like Zimbabwe is very expensive. But when you look at the data, 9.9 million users are actually on Tsaona data. Tsaona. They use, this is social media bundles.
Yeah.
Right? That's what most people use. They are not on Wi-Fi.
They're not
They're
on unlimited data.
Unlimited data.
Yep.
They're actually using, it's something like 112 Zim dollars per 4 megabytes.
What does that mean? I don't understand the meaning of Zim dollars. You need to distill
so
it to US dollars
that's like,
for 6-year-olds like me.
6 cents US dollars using today's rate, which you told me was has just gone haywire. But yeah, using today's rate would be something like 6 cents a megabyte, which then means that Zimbabwe is actually one of the cheapest.
Yeah.
Right, but also unstable, because tomorrow, as the rate goes, it means that number is going to come, closer and closer to zero.
Yeah.
So the point, well, not the point. Oh no, it's actually 2 cents. It comes to 2 cents a megabyte using the previous rate. But if you use today's rate that you've given me, it means that it's now closer to 1 cent a megabyte.
Yeah.
That's what most people are using. And if you compare that to the rest of Africa, it turns out Zimbabwe is actually the lowest. Not because they're doing things that are innovative, but purely because of the regulation.
Yeah.
That they can only increase the price because the regulator agrees to the price. And why I was catching stray bullets, and which I don't understand, is that the regulator in Zimbabwe, when you look at not just Econet, because this, I'm not representing, or I'm not arguing for Econet, just Econet. You have Net One there, and Net One prices are actually even lower, right? And you have Telecel there, you have
Is Telestar still working?
Whoever is still using it. But the point I want to make is, if you look at their corporate head offices, they're still operating where they were operating from the last 20 years. And there's only one person who's actually built a new swanky office space.
The regulator.
The regulator. In an upmarket neighborhood, and they get hefty salaries and they're okay. But I don't think that they're representing the sector well, because, we've traveled to parts of Africa and they're already on 5G. In Zim, we don't have 5G, right? And if you're to make that investment, it means that you have to have a return on your investment.
Absolutely.
Right? So you're the expert on these matters. Why am I catching stray bullets?
Look,
Is my argument, am I being paid by Econet? Because maybe I'm being paid by Econet to make this argument. But to me, it seems like it's a very straightforward argument.
Yeah, look, I have sympathy for your argument. I don't understand the opprobrium you're getting on X for your post in this regard. I think what you said is very fair. I think Econet gets a very bad rap because they're so big and they're dominant, and people expect them to just deliver magical products. But the reality is that they have to operate within this very difficult exchange control environment. And if you think about their network, their base stations, these things require electricity. And when there's no power, either these things go off, or they have to light up their diesel generators, or they have to make investments which require hard currency to install solar panels and battery storage at their base stations. So if the tariffs are not economic, then they don't have the free cash flows to make those investments to take all their base stations off grid, or pay for diesel, which you have to pay for in hard currency to keep them running when there's no power. And we've had power outages for half a day at a time sometimes. So you've got all these challenges that constrain their capacity to maintain their network, to invest in it, to upgrade it. Because to take us from 4G to 5G requires investment. It requires hard currency spending. And if they're not generating that, just recently they had to do a rights issue to pay off some debt, all right? Which, if you actually look at the initial debt issuance, the plan was to generate free cash flows to pay this debt off, right? And they weren't able to do that because of the tariff regime. So we've got some of the cheapest tariffs in Africa, if not the cheapest, at the low end. And then we've got very, restrictive exchange control, and we've got a power crisis. All of these things combined, I can't imagine how hard it is being.
Maybe let me ask the producer. Maybe Econet is paying for our production. Would you like to be very clear on who pays for our production? Because maybe Econet is paying, or Net One, or maybe tell us all.
So none of those organizations that you have mentioned are paying for our production. And look, I think it's a public secret, if I could put it that way, that Econet is not the most loved business around. To a certain extent by certain members of the public, but also the authorities. And maybe there are other reasons.
Could you explain the reason? Because, okay, so we look at license over the last 10 years, and now we know, we've got the information.
There's only one network.
There's only one network that pays.
Exactly. Obviously, they've contributed a lot. There's the license aspect, but also even the growth in the mobile telephone space. So when we are talking of this high mobile penetration, a bigger part of that is actually Econet. About 74% of data traffic in Zimbabwe on the mobile side is actually Econet. The voice probably close to 70 again. And I think if you look at what we could term maybe innovations in that space over the years, they've always been the trendsetter. They have actually deployed more than $1 billion of investments over the years from when they started. And they are a private organization, obviously. There's a requirement for return on investment on the part of their shareholders. And we know that the Zim capital markets does not have capacity to provide that kind of capital. Over the years, they were getting capital offshore using their international relationships. And like what Rufara have said, because of exchange control, because of the whole chopping and changing in the tariff regime, they have not been able to service some of that debt, and it's actually has affected their capacity to keep their network in the right kind of condition. So
it was actually a rights issue. So
yes,
they had to ask money from shareholders,
exactly,
rather than internally generated revenue.
Exactly, because now they'd sort of technically defaulted in a way, because I think they were supposed to have paid around April thereabout, and then they got some sort of a reprieve from their from the debenture holders to extend that facility until they had the rights issue, which was not really that much supported again because of the whole liquidity problem we have, because they were looking for US dollars. So this is a private organization that has actually changed the face of the country. In a way, just imagine if we had just Net One and Telesol as the network operators.
So the question I would have, and this is something that a lot of people have asked, would anything change if MTN was in Zimbabwe? If MTN had to pay the license fee and MTN was operating in Zimbabwe, would suddenly data prices come off?
I think,
would we have 5G? Would we have all these special things that people are comparing Econet to the rest of the world? Would it change?
My honest view is I think MTN would have left so many years ago. There is no way that they could have stuck around with this kind of regulations that we have. For Econet is because it's a Zim based company by a Zimbabwean entrepreneur. I don't think the same way that I've seen other international brands, actually, whether it's in banking, industry, manufacturing, or thereabouts, they have left. Is certainly, if you are here purely as an investor, you don't have any connections, any social considerations, and etc. You would not stick around for what you are seeing right now. So look, I don't buy this whole idea that maybe MTN would have been happy with this kind of tariff regime. They would have gone back to where they came from.
Rivaro,
Yeah,
what are your
absolutely.
thoughts on that? Do you think that Econet is actually going out of its way to ensure that there's no competition in Zimbabwe, so that they enjoy these supernormal profits, and yet they've got a rights issue?
No. I think a business that mature going to shareholders with a
Cap in hand.
cap in hand. I was going to say a begging bowl. It's been around since 1998, right? It's got 70+ % market share. It should be a mature business at this stage that's
Churning out cash flows.
reinvesting, paying juicy dividends. The reason why they're not in that place is because it's a very difficult place to do business. And I think, one of the reasons why we celebrate Thrive as a great entrepreneur is that he got this very early on and he diversified outside Zimbabwe. Imagine if all of his eggs were in this basket called Zimbabwe. Would he be a billionaire living in London?
Maybe not quite. So there's something that Briggs said 2 weeks ago, which
Yeah.
I found very interesting and what he said is, when you look at foreign capital,
Yeah.
it's way more protected. So if it was a Chinese or a British or an American investment, it will receive a lot more protection from the government of the day than local investors. And here we have the largest and certainly the most significant local investor in Zimbabwe, and he's having a problem of pricing, where two of his competitors are limping.
Yeah, and they haven't
Cannot
paid their
survive.
license.
And they haven't paid their license, and he's trying to solve a problem, and government only increases his tariffs 100% in year on year when inflation is at 853%.
Yeah, so
And the regulator is sitting in his swanky offices and he thinks everything is fine.
it's appalling, and it's a sad day. When we see this happening in our country. I think I actually don't understand the purpose of the price controlling data and voice and all the services provided by telcos. It vexes me. This is, if you look at a business like Econet, it's a private enterprise, and there are two other networks that are owned by government. So presumably, if the argument or the idea was we want to protect society's least and most vulnerable, you have Tal1, you have Telecel, right? You have Net1, and they ought to offer society's least and most vulnerable an affordable tariff, right? The private version, so if you actually think about it in the context of life and death, okay? If you have a heart attack right now, right? Ranga and I will have two options, okay? We can take you to Pararenyatwa, or we can take you to the avenues, right? And if we choose to take you to the avenues, right, I suspect very much that in the emergency room, there'll be a person there who will say to us, how are you going to pay for this? And if we don't have a coherent story, they will show us the door. And you may die. This is a life and death issue, right? And the private sector in medicine is allowed to behave like that. They can price however they see fit. So why can't Econet price in the manner that they see fit? Why is the price controlled? Why is it sub-economical? So you've got it doesn't make any sense to me.
This is the guy who was talking about pragmatism. Is this at the level of pragmatism? Like they want Econet to fail, and then once it has failed, once it's on the ground, never mind that now we're actually on third generation, because I see a lot of edge. Let me see, what are we on right now? Okay, we've got Wi-Fi, but sometimes, very often
You see
you're
the
on
E
edge.
for edge.
Yeah, you're on edge. And a lot of the world, even in Africa, is now on 5G.
So that is what you get if you you are regulating with an iron fist. And you'd expect that maybe at least with a state-owned entities that obviously do not haven't been paying license fees and other things, they don't have the burden on their cash flows. They should be able to lead in terms of bringing in 5G and other things. But sadly, the only players that have got the scale and have demonstrated over the years that if they're given enough room, they'll be able to make them competitive on that space. Look, we are not saying Econet is an
Is a
angel,
darling.
yeah. But look, their business, and to the extent that obviously the customers won't be happy with their services,
But Ranga,
they've got an
that's-
option.
That's
to
what I
go.
want to ask you.
Yeah, they have to go.
Why do you think there is so much angst, so much anger towards Econet?
No, we're just jealous. We're just jealous of a successful entrepreneur. Look at in how bad it is right now that you're supposed to, someone like a Strive or some of these big guys are supposed to be poster boys of the Zim story, right? This is, they've created these things from scratch, and not only that, they've actually gone outside the country and proven that they are entrepreneurs. And who are we celebrating? Gold smugglers, Bembingas, and that kind of thing. So I think for me, it's actually sheer jealous. It's also what one of the guests that we had here, that probably we don't have a culture of supporting our own entrepreneurs in the country, and I don't know why, because they're a big employer, paying tax, license fees, and etc. And I think they're at a scale where even the fiscus, if they really need some sort of an emergence kind of support,
Bailout.
yeah, they would possibly get it from an Econet if it was pumping and it was collecting, generating cash flows and that kind of thing. But obviously, I think politically they will be viewed as too big. But at the end of the day, we all suffer. So it's said that you've spoken about regulators leaving it large when the regulators are struggling. It's quite common in Zim. I mean, how many banks have failed, and yet the RBZ is
The tallest building in the
exactly
city.
in town. Every day they are talking about AML, or such, money laundering and things like that, looking after the smaller fish. Yeah,
Okay,
it's,
okay. So we need to move on to a different sector, one that I am conflicted in many ways, and that's the.
You're
clothing
usually
retail.
very gung ho one way or the other.
I've got very conflicting views on this, and
Okay.
you know, I'm trying to reconcile the conflict in my head, which is, fashion. I am
A
quite-
fashionista?
Well, one could say that, but I love fashion, and I think that there is no way a good suit should cost $20. So I think that the most difficult business to be in Zimbabwe at the present moment is to be a clothing retailer. I think that it's a very tough business to be in, and if you see what happened, let's say 20 years ago, if you really think about what Edgar's, Truett's, Barron's, Mikkels, what they were really at the forefront of popularizing or giving the common man a good quality clothes
Yeah.
at an affordable rate and credit that they could, wear a suit, wear clothes that ordinarily they wouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
So they were able to do that in a phenomenal way. So if you look at South Africa, it's pretty much because of Edcon, because of Truett's. They were bringing in high-end clothes to the common man. But what has happened now, 20 years later, is the market has substantially changed. So when you look at the really good brands, they've become even more elite. Yeah. But
Unless they're coming out of a barrel.
yes, that too. And a lot of it is illegal, but we shall not go into that. But there are companies that are bringing in suits through formal channels, paying their taxes, but now at a substantially lower rate, $20. We see that. And it's synthetic. So
I haven't been in the market for a suit for more than a decade.
which is the fantastic thing, because when you look at a suit, Oh, it could be anything.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, shoes. Our good friend Edmund was shared, shoes that he bought from a bearer. It was like $10. Yeah. So it's become extremely accessible. So I understand the idea of these $20 suits from an economic perspective because it just brings accessibility that Edgar's and Truett's did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, they don't last as long. These are suits that you can wear maybe 2 or 3 times before they're really bad. And you know what's worse is you will take it to your dry cleaner, and that will actually destroy.
That'll end it.
That will actually end it. Right? But it doesn't matter because you paid $20 for it. Yeah. So you just buy another one. And a lot of times we've got $100. You could buy a really good suit from Edgar's, or you could just buy 5 suits. And those 5 suits will last you 5 months, but that's okay. They tend to be very shiny, synthetic, but that's the brilliance of globalization and what the Chinese have been able to do. I give it to them. But from what a good suit should be, from a fashionista perspective, certainly that's leading us down a rabbit hole that we don't want to be in.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you this. Like I said in my preamble, I think that it's a tough business being an Edgar's, a Truett's, or any of the clothiers in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, I don't know that that tough is a strong enough word. I mean, look, you've got a guy that's doing things by the book. They have business premises that meets all the council standards. They've got the health certificate and all the other required certificates. They are paying VAT. They are paying payroll taxes. They are paying income taxes as well. They are paying import duties on whatever they import, right? And right outside their premises is a vendor who is not doing anything by the book, who's not paying any taxes, that is competing with them, that is selling exactly what is being sold in Truett's or Edgar's So how do you compete with the informal trader who's allowed to sell their wares right outside your premises, literally on your doorstep? I mean, it's you don't see that anywhere else in the civilized world, and yet it's normal in our country. So it just makes it impossible to actually thrive as a clothing retailer that wants to do things properly.
Your take? Okay.
Yeah, so there's also the aspect of the policy chopping and changing, especially on the monetary side. So you'd find that the likes of the clothing chain, the anchors of their business were mostly the credit stores.
Financial services.
Yeah. So you'd find that they had some cash brands, for example, Express for Edgar's and Number One for Truett's. But I think the main anchors were Topics and Truett's when it comes to Truett's men and women, and then also Edgar's. But these were credit-driven businesses. So how do you maintain a credit-driven business in an economy where the currencies are changing, there's hyperinflation, and you change the currency again, and that kind of thing? I think over the years, as those changes were happening, they sort of killed the entire credit culture in the market.
I think that's a very good point, Ranga, that you're making, because when you look at South Africa, they still have Truett's and Edgar's in South Africa, and they still have the Chinese products, they still have all these other lower end. But what sustains Edgar's is they're able to provide 12 to 24 months credit.
Exactly.
So somebody is actually getting a good product that is affordable, and all these other frills that they get with, and essentially becomes a financial services play.
So there's that, and also what you've seen with the middle class. So because most of these so Edgar's or Truett's, they're mostly positioned for the middle class, and starting from the civil servants. So you'd find that maybe Topics was quite popular with the teachers and other civil servants, and obviously then the executives at the entry levels, mostly on the tradesmen. So also the same problem where you have got civil servants not affording to buy these things.
Okay, so the economy.
The economy has actually suffered. Then obviously the informalization. Now where pretty much everyone can actually bring in stuff, whether from China, from South Africa, because our borders are porous, So we are talking of the barrel, but there's also a whole contraband of clothing items that are coming from China or from other sources, and they are going through our borders, and I suspect most of them are not paying taxes by straight on the pavement, but also even, people are just selling clothes from their own cars. I've seen them opening their boot, and then it's a whole shop altogether. So that has actually affected the entire business model for those businesses, and it's sad.
What's the solution? Stability.
So stability. You have a stable kind of monetary environment, and also the economy, and then we start to have a middle class again, and so because the middle class and stability is important for the credit model. And once you have that, look, you can't do much to the informalization. And I think when you look at it, all things being equal, it's I think most of the people, when they migrate into the middle class, they would want to buy
So I think
good
I get
and
Ranga's
solid
point.
kind of clothes.
So Ranga's point is, and I think it actually reconciles my conflict in my head. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Because I think his argument, if I capture it correctly, is he's saying that actually people like a good suit. It's not that people want Tawana suit.
No.
It's not that they want
People don't want Tawana anything.
Tawana anything. They don't want.
Hence the
Tawana.
name. Like, Tawana is not a good thing.
But they're forced into it.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It's circumstances that force them to buy a dollar suit. So they want the aspiration, but unfortunately they cannot afford it. So if you have a stable economy, if you have a middle class, because everybody wants to be middle class, with a stable economy, then the model Edgar's Truworths actually works because they have got the funding to then extend the credit and everybody would move. You can't change the informalization, but there won't be any takers. So if the economy was doing well, Tawana food will not be there. Tawana data will not be there. Tawana clothes will not be there because people's aspirations are for a good suit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what you're saying about credit in the clothing retail space, if you actually extrapolate it to the rest of the economy, if you think about, so you say, what's your best guess as to aggregate salaries and wages in our country? If even if you actually take those off the table and you just look at, say,
$75 is what the average is making a month.
We do about $2 billion a year in diaspora remittances. And one of the things that, we lose by being a cash economy is that none of that, we don't get the benefit of leverage on recurring income, right? So if you think about it, if you were receiving $2 billion a year in income in a different jurisdiction, how much
Times 5.
how much could you actually leverage, right? If we were writing mortgage,
Demand would be 10 billion.
if we were writing mortgages, how much more construction would be happening in Zimbabwe? If we were writing finance leases for vehicles, what would the demand be for vehicles? If we were writing retail credit, what would the numbers of an Edgar Truworths or anyone in that space, it'll be multiples of what it is today. So one of the things that one of the ways that we've shot ourselves in the foot in terms of constraining economic activity is we've decided that we're going to get rid of credit. We're going to be a cash economy. And I often hear Zimbabweans brag about how everything is cash as if it makes things better. But actually, one of the reasons why we've suffered and not grown is because we don't have credit. All the world's major economies, fast-growing economies, benefit from.
It's a pillar of capitalism.
Yeah.
That's what Trumpeter says. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we have spoken a lot about this, but I think today we zeroed in on what's actually happening in our sector. And what is happening is we're informalizing the market. And I think that is the big problem that we're going to find in Zimbabwe. If you think about it, there's $2 billion that we're receiving from the diaspora, but a lot of that ends up at the National Metros Bank. And if it ends up at the National Metros Bank, we cannot leverage off it. If it was in this formal system, so imagine if our banking system had and was receiving this $2 billion and it stayed in the formal banking system, what it means is that banks will be able to leverage and 5 times or even 10 times, but I think 5 times is a good rate, which is about 10 billion. So that's how much demand would be in our economy. That actually benefits the entire economy. Today, the problems that we are facing is essentially because we're informalizing the market. We're a cash economy because we don't trust the financial services system. We don't trust our fiscal system. We don't trust our monetary system. So this is an appeal to the policymaker that as you do your budgets, just think about it seriously, that the problem, the instability that we have is essentially one of distrust. We don't trust our financial system. We don't trust our monetary system. And if you brought stability to the monetary system for a long period, perhaps 5 years or more, then you will start seeing industry booming. It's not because people like Tsaona that they are taking Tsaona food, Tsaona clothing, and Tsaona data. It's because of desperation. And I don't think it's sustainable. Right now, they're taking Tsaona, but who knows if the economy continues the way it is? Who knows what's going to happen in the next 5 years? And what we need is to lift them up. They know what's good for them, and all they're just asking for is stability. With that, and on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful Friday. If you disagree with us, please write, comment as much as you can. Just don't be disagreeable. So, disagree, but don't be disagreeable. And if you're Econet, please start paying us. Because it turns out we're doing this gig for free. Yeah. Anyway, enjoy your weekend and have a lovely day. Cheers.
Cheers. Right.